Hello and welcome to the fifth lesson in the language and technology scheme of work. This is a lesson that's basically designed to be done next week. So basically when you sort of quote unquote return from Easter and it sort of forms part of your third week of learning. Just first task to get you started is how do new words enter the English language? It says here, considering how diverse the English language is, how many different ways can you think as to how new words enter the English language? As always, I'll give you about 5 seconds in terms of the video, but spend 5 minutes or so just thinking about where do we find the words that end up in the English language. Now, this is a lesson that, if I was doing it in an actual classroom, would primarily be making notes on these kind of different classifications of word formation. There are different ways that we basically generate words into the English language, and they're all, as much as technology is important, this is actually more of a language change style lesson because it will look at more broadly how these things happen. But technology does have a massive impact upon how we create kind of new words. Here are some of the categories. We have loans, we have shifts, we have shortenings, we have composites, and we have blends. And they all work together to create new language effectively. All of them have their own slide apart from loans, because loans is kind of self-explanatory really. It's words borrowed from other languages. As we travelled further abroad, as we became more global, as we had more people kind of immigration, different countries, if we had words or if we had things that we didn't have in our culture that were in other cultures, quite often when we borrowed those things, we borrowed the word as well. Good examples are often food and fruit, words that they use in other cultures we just took because it was easier than coming up with like a new word, a fresh word, or even sort of styles of cooking. I always think of the word tagine, for example, from Morocco. It's a style of cooking that we now do. There are loads of words that we borrow, and they are everywhere in terms of the English language. Obviously, you can have a bit of a look for them yourself. The other ones, though, tend to be how we actually manipulate language a bit more to create different words. Starting with shifts, so we have 5 examples here. 4 of them are shifts of meaning, and 1 of them is what we call a functional shift. So we'll start with the shifts of meaning. So narrowing and widening are 2 examples. So when narrowing is when the word narrows to include fewer objects or ideas, and widening is when it broadens, so it incorporates more objects and ideas. Amelioration is when the meaning of the word is more positive than it was originally. Pejoration is when the meaning of the word is more negative than it was originally. Now, this can be quite hard to identify in some older texts because we don't necessarily know exactly how words are used. We weren't around in the 1700s or the 1800s, so it can be a bit hard to work out if a word has been changed for the better or the worse, or if it's broadened or narrowed. Now, because of that, sometimes it's about the context of the word and how it's being used, and you can sometimes work out that maybe it's being utilised differently than how we'd use it. But there are some really obvious examples, like words like wicked and gay, for example, are good examples of words that have changed in terms of amelioration or pejoration over the last 30 to 40 years. Words change their class. This is functional shift here, so the idea being that actually the word just goes from being one type of word to another type of word. A good example here is the word text. So I send a text, so text there is a noun, but now we talk about texting someone, the idea of the text becomes a verb. This happens a lot in technology because what we do is we tend to take the proper noun, like the name of something like the Facebook or WhatsApp or Twitter, and we talk about it in terms of a verb. Or with Twitter's example, the word tweet, we talk about tweeting someone. I'm going to WhatsApp someone is a good example of the proper noun being utilised. So they kind of create their own verbs that we utilise to talk about them, and that's a functional shift. Another way that things are changed is through the use of shortenings. Now, shortenings have 3 categories. We have clippings, so like words like television becoming telly and refrigerator becoming fridge for ease of use. Initialisms and acronyms sometimes look very similar, but they have a slight subtle difference, so it's worth kind of getting your head around it. Initialisms take the first letter of each word in a phrase, but they're sounded out as each letter in a sequence, so BBC. Acronyms, on the other hand, can be sort of the same thing as happening. The first letter of each word is taken, but it makes a new word. So an example here would be scuba, so self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. Another good example of this happening is the word radar, which now I say it is always a word I never quite remember exactly what it stands for, but it's something that you can look up in your own time. So if the words are said individually or the letters are said individually in a sequence, it's an initialism. If it's an acronym, the letters form a word effectively that you can then sort of say out yourself. Composites is the next example. So we have something that you would probably be aware of from your GCSE days, the use of prefixes and suffixes. So obviously prefixes come before the word, so unsympathetic, and then suffixes come afterwards, so vaporise. So just by the addition of a prefix or a suffix, we generate new language that way. And we have compounding here, so the combining or adding of words together. So the word post stands alone, the word man stands alone, but if a man delivers the post, he becomes a postman. So therefore it creates that new word there. Blends, similar in some ways to compounding, but basically take parts from two words and combine them together instead. There's quite a lot of creative ways that this is done. You see it a lot with celebrity couples, but there are actual words that we kind of have in the dictionary, like brunch, for example, where breakfast and lunch is kind of squashed together. You drop a few of the letters and you create a new word that way. So this is all kind of leading towards this task here. So Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, notice how the Instagram one's not done by Instagram, do have, or did have when I first created this lesson, glossaries of the words being used, because there were new concepts, maybe words being used in ways that they hadn't been used before. There were new ideas that maybe people had to get their heads around. So what I'd like you to do is to take one of these, or if you really want to, you can take all three of these, click on the link, and then start to identify, look at the words that are being used and start to identify the concepts from this lesson. Can you identify any of the concepts we've already discussed or we've already obviously talked through in this video? Are there some words that then have transcended maybe where they were? So Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, they're words that maybe were created for those purposes, but are now utilised outside of that context? What is suggested by the need for a glossary? So basically, what are we sort of seeing? If there's a glossary for Facebook and Twitter, what did that suggest about them as means of communication? Also, why didn't or why doesn't Instagram have one? And now that might have changed over time, so it might be worth researching and just having a bit of a look. Does Instagram have its own glossary that's been created by Instagram itself? And does the use of jargon make these sites more inclusive or exclusive? So basically, do we feel more included by the fact that there's a specific language that we use to use these things? Or does it exclude people, perhaps, in terms of how it's utilised? So yeah, choose one of them, and as I said, like break down. So you'll see, I think if I remember rightly, the Instagram one's possibly has more examples of this in action. More examples of blending and compounding, and the changing of words in terms of functional shifts. But you can also look at the Facebook and Twitter examples as well. The last thing I'm going to ask you to do as well, and it should take you maybe sort of 10 to 15 minutes, make a few notes as you go along, it says here, emoji, the first global language. Just read the article and form your own opinion on the validity of emojis as a form of communication. Now, you should have all along been creating a reading log anyway. This can form part of that effectively. So it's not like something additional that you need to read. It's something that's part of kind of your reading log. And it just explores the idea of emoji as actually, whilst it may just be images, it is a very flexible way of communicating with people who don't speak the same language as you. So maybe it's just worth kind of thinking, well, what do you think about emojis? What does the article say? Do you agree or disagree? Ideas along those sort of, that sort of path, basically. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. Lesson 6, I've just put on a Word document or a Google Doc effectively, and it is creating your own glossary for a social media site of your choosing. Now, as I said, the ones I found were a few years old. I've taught this lesson for a few years now, so these things have changed and moved on. You can choose one of those three. You can choose a different one like Snapchat or something along those lines, and basically just come up with a glossary of words that are used. And they could be new words. They could be words that have had a meaning shift in some capacity. They could be words that have functionally shifted. They could be blends and composites and all those things we've looked at. And just create one and try and you'll see on the document I've put up on the in the folder, it explains kind of examples of what you might look for, but just create your own glossary for something. If you don't use social media, the other option is that you do it for maybe some other form of communication. So it could be like a forum, for example. There may be specific things, or any other endeavor you do. I think in the past I've talked about DeviantArt and LiveJournal and various other any site that you utilize where a strict or specific glossary of terms and ideas are utilized to communicate. As always, if you're not sure, just send me an email and I'll give you some ideas. Anyway, as always, look after yourselves, stay safe, and I will return with another video some point later in the week. Okay, bye.